There we go. Share the screen. Okay. Go to that and that. All righty. So welcome back to our look at prophecies being fulfilled after the Bible and into our own lives and into the future. So a lot of stuff we'll be talking about, looking at, taking our time, taking it slow, but we're going to see as we lay these events out, seeing what happened in the Bible as the foundation and setup for all this, how everything's playing out and how poetic the Lord is in his timing, in his use of people and places, and there are just no coincidences in things when it comes to the Lord. Now, as a special request for those who are online and not always able to hear everyone in the back, I would like to ask for my class that for those who love to contribute, love to hear from you, that we go ahead and pass the mic back so that those in the online can hear. Hope that doesn't discourage anyone from sharing, but anyway, so we'll, yeah. So leave that there. I will turn that off for that. Turn it off. People have something to say. Okay. So Isaiah chapter 9. And again, what we're doing is what I've compiled for us is a visual tour through these things that have been put together by a Messianic Jew named Jonathan Cahn. Got his books here. What I'm presenting is no substitute for his books. And of course, nothing is a substitute for scripture. This is all just stuff to help us and enhance our understanding of these things as we go. So online here, we left off where Jesus left off, the Mount of Olives. As mentioned Sunday, this is where Jesus departed for the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, kicking off the Passion Week, the last week of his ministry for his death and resurrection. He ascended from here, he will return to here. And a silly Eric thought occurred when I thought about he's coming back here. We know where Jesus is coming back. So I thought, do we have security cameras set up there? Do we have like motion detectors? So this would be really cool. I'm thinking this would be a really cool moment to capture, but then immediately the thought hits me, duh. No one's going to miss this. The whole world is going to know when he comes back. So that stuff won't be necessary. But it's cool to be able to watch and wait. But the Lord has us to be occupied in the meantime, and we'll get to all that. So oftentimes, these events that we're going to be looking at, past, present, and future, the Lord's real focus is the people and the land. And he wants his people on his land to be, as we talked last time, resting in and enjoying that land under him. We saw last time in Genesis chapter 12, 1876 BC, so a long time ago. Genesis chapter 12, the deed of the land was given to Abraham and his descendants after him. Very specifically, the promise is through Isaac, not Ishmael. So through Ishmael, we have the Islamic religion. Muhammad in the 600s AD claims descent from one of Ishmael's sons, Keter, if I'm not mistaken on that. But the promise in the land is for Abraham through Isaac and the Jewish people on down from there. So the deed was given 1876 BC. 430 years later, with the Exodus in 1446 BC, Moses gives the people some of the instructions for the land, some of the things the Lord desires for the people on the land. That included the Sabbath year of rest for the land. Don't work the land. You can still eat off the land, but don't work the land. And then 40 years later, Moses' farewell address in Deuteronomy, it's also added that it's to be a year of releasing of debts as well. So there's a financial impact. And these principles definitely apply as we go forward through time. But the key thing is that the breaking of a Sabbath year would be a sign that people had pushed God out of their life. The Sabbath year is called the Shemitah. We are in a Sabbath year right now. It started in September. In fact, Sister Ashley, we will turn to you, since you shared something with me before class about something you saw on the Shemitah. Would you please? Yeah. I just want to test the mic.
Okay. Test. Okay. No, I just saw a video that's so loud, and I saw a video where they were actually filming and showing some of the farmers not planting, and they interviewed them and talked to them, and they had so much joy And they were talking about how this is our Sabbath year. You know, we're resting. We're not going to be, you know, planting. And what I guess stuff they did have, foods or products they did have, they were actually giving away.
Wow.
They weren't keeping. So I told Eric, you know, that my phone was probably spying on me, because it popped up on my phone and it was just this little short video about the Sabbath year, and it actually had interviews with actual farmers in Israel doing this.
Wow, amen. You just take off that there, pass it around as we go. Okay, so this is something that is still in practice to this day for those Jews who are practicing that. So it's pretty legitimate stuff. So the people through Joshua go to the land, and what happens in the year 734 BC, which is a Sabbath year, 735 into 734 BC, Israel, after the kingdom had been split in two, the 10 tribes of the north, nation of Israel, they get invaded by Assyria. This is a very big deal. They had been breached and they had been invaded. Captives had been taken, so they had lost land to Assyria in 734 BC. Why? Because they had neglected their God. We've seen in the verses we read last time that not only do we have the deed given, but there are the warnings given, and there is the promise of restoration when people turn back to the Lord. But this was a big shakeup for the nation of Israel. In fact, that brings us to Isaiah chapter 9. This is the nation's response to this invasion from Assyria. So Isaiah chapter 9, verses 8 through 13, very, very key to then and now. Isaiah 9, verse 8. The Lord sends a message against Jacob, and it falls on Israel, and all the people know it. That is, Ephraim and the inhabitants of Samaria, that was the capital of Assyria, capital of Israel, asserting in pride and in arrogance of heart. And here's their quote: "The bricks have fallen down, but we will rebuild with smooth stones. The sycamores have been cut down, but we will replace them with cedars and build ourselves a tower." That's in the Septuagint. Verse 11, "Therefore the Lord raises against them adversaries from Rezin and spurs their enemies on, the Arameans or Syrians on the east, the Philistines on the west, and they devour Israel with gaping jaws. In spite of all this, his anger does not turn away, and his hand is still stretched out." Verse 13, "Yet the people do not turn back to him who struck them, nor do they seek the Lord of hosts." This is a very powerful, big deal, what happens here. The people choose to be defiant instead of having a revival and being reconciled and brought back to God when this happens. And this will play out in modern times. So 11 years later, Syria conquers the rest of the nation. The nation of Israel is no more. So that's what happens there. Again, that was a Sabbath year that the warning came. So we fast forward in time, we still have the nation of Judah with the 2 tribes in the south. And what happens there is the kingdom of Babylon with Nebuchadnezzar. He comes in the year 605 and basically makes them a puppet state under him. He hasn't fully conquered and destroyed yet. They're just a puppet state under him. That's in July, the Hebrew month of Tammuz, in the year 605 BC. And all of these things, none of this you have to remember, but all of this will come back again in modern times. So now I'll bring these back up and make the connections. 599 BC, Cyrus is born. He will grow up to be the king of Persia. Cyrus has a connection to 2 US presidents, and we'll get to all that. Yeah. So after Nebuchadnezzar makes Judah a puppet state under him in 605, he's already started taking people like Daniel and Ezekiel. In the year 587 BC, which from 588 to 587 BC is a Sabbath year, Nebuchadnezzar invades and destroys Jerusalem. Solomon's temple is burnt to the ground. Jeremiah writes Lamentations, all that stuff happens. It's in the summer of the Hebrew month of Av. The time between his first invasion, making them a puppet state, and the destruction of the temple, the time between there is 19 years and a few weeks. A couple years later, 560 BC, Cyrus starts ruling in Persia. 539 BC, Cyrus, at 60 years old, is at the peak of his power, conquers Babylon. because at that time, the 70 years of captivity had been fulfilled. They were in captivity for 70 years because they had neglected the Sabbath year for 490 years. That's 70 Sabbath years that the land had not enjoyed. So the land enjoyed those 70 Sabbath years altogether while the people were removed from the land. The 70 years were up, Cyrus conquers Babylon, and then people are allowed to return. And the Old Testament ends with that period of restoration. Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, all that stuff. So Cyrus then dies in the year 530 BC after reigning for 30 years. So any questions? Does anyone have any thoughts or ideas, questions on that Old Testament background, foundation to all of this? We're all good there. Now we're going to jump into New Testament times. Let's remember one thing we touched about at the end of last week is that going back to ancient times in the synagogues every Sabbath, all the Jews in every synagogue around the world, they would read the same section of the scriptures called the parasha. So around the world, same day, that same scripture is being read throughout. So that will come up as we go. So in New Testament times, the year 66, after the majority of the New Testament has happened, but not all, the Jewish people revolt against Rome. And so in response, the Roman governor of the area, Cestius Gallus, he invades the land to try to stop the revolt. He sieges Jerusalem for 9 days. He's got it blocked off, but the siege fails. So he withdraws his army. While he's withdrawing, his troops are being ambushed and suffering losses. The Romans are driven out of Jerusalem. And so the Jews in revolt, they create a temporary provisional government there in Jerusalem. So then Emperor Nero basically says, he sends a general, Vespasian, to go in and crush the revolt. Vespasian enters the land from the north, focuses first on Galilee. And in the next few months, he and his son Titus just wage this complete campaign of destruction, obliterating all the rebel strongholds, decimating the civilians. And Galilee is the first of the lands to be lost to the Jewish people, just as Galilee was where Assyria first went in, with Israel. So Galilee is lost to the people as a result of this. So going into the year 67, and this is going to be very key. Watch as we go forward, years that end in 67 and 50 years later, 17. So in the year 1567, 50 years after that would be 1617. So years 67 and 17 are going to have special significance, years that end with those two digits. So in the year 67 now, Vespasian invades Judah beginning in the month of May. The big battle here is the Battle of Yodfat, where a Jewish rebel is taken prisoner named Josephus. The Romans take a liking to him. He ends up writing stuff for the Romans about the Jews. We have a lot of those writings today. So after that, Peter and Paul are martyred. In the year 70, Rome destroys the temple. So this is AD 70. The year 69 into 70 is a Sabbath year. No coincidences with these timings here. So they've destroyed the temple, but the Jews are still holding out. In fact, their last holdout is a place we're going to go to now called Masada. So get this going here.
Okay, so you're going to.
Yep.
All right. So all the stuff in the Old Testament. This is distracting.
I'm good at that.
Okay, so all that stuff in the Old Testament, you said you're laying this foundation, showing a pattern of Sabbath years, or things that were going on with that Sabbath years. And that was Old Testament. Okay, so now you're saying that it's consistent New Testament wise.
Yep.
Okay, so did anything good happen on Sabbath years? We're talking about all this bad stuff and conquering and all this chaos. So is it just the focus that if they don't, behave themselves, something bad's going to happen?
Yes, and those were the warnings in Leviticus about that. Instructions were in Exodus, warnings in Leviticus, but also the promise of restoration if they did it right.
Okay.
And so there, of all the time they were in the land, it was those 490 years that they were punished for not honoring those Sabbath years during that span. But just like anything, the word of God does not return void. Anyone can pick up the Bible, read a verse, apply that verse, and receive a benefit from that. Now, the fullness of it is for his covenant people, but in Old Testament times, the covenant nation of Israel, who made that vow and commitment to be under God and to follow him fully, you will be our God, we will be your people. And that's the same for us in the New Testament. We have made a vow to follow, we are Judeo-Christians, following not the law of Moses anymore, but the scriptures are old and new that apply to us, and those principles that go from there. And so the good things happen and are there to be followed. The main thing we're emphasizing for class purposes is how they lost the land and why, and what the return looked like that happened in 1948 and how we got there, and how that sets the stage for where other end time things are happening, where Jesus will be coming back to the Mount of Olives. So it also basically the way people left the land is going to connect to the way people come back to the land. And so we'll see that.
Because the history bogs me down.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, because the history bogs me down a lot.
Yeah, which is why I say it's not stuff you have to remember. When the connections come up, I'll bring it back up. So I'm just sort of planting it in there in the background. Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff. Good questions. So here we are at Masada. I'll back up a little bit to get kind of a sense here. It's on the water here. And so this is actually a fortress that was built by Herod the Great. And the zealots have now taken it over. So some images here. So rather than be taken captive by Rome, and some of you may be familiar with the story here. This is in the year 74 now, March 31st, time of the Passover, the month of Nisan on the Jewish calendar, mid-month. So let me show these pictures here. So definite hard to get to fortress here. The little pathway that went up to it is it's actually called the snake path because it winds so much. And yes, that's a cable car that you could take up there. The view up there, this is hard to access. So definitely suitable for its purposes. This is basically for the Jewish nation, their last stand in their revolt against Rome. There's a model, what it looked like. And this is less than 10 years after the martyrdom of Peter and Paul. Yeah, any volunteers? Another mock-up there. So there's that. Let me also show you right here. There we go. A little in this part of it as well. Again, just giving you a sense for the feel of this place where this last stand happened. Is actually not too far north of Sodom and Gomorrah in Getty, that area. And one last set, we'll call it good. And the mock up there. Walkways. Tramways. Yeah. Okay, so we get a sense and a feel and flavor for this location here. So that's a nice shot. We'll leave that one. So what happens here is rather than be taken captive by Rome, the soldiers decide to take their own lives and die as free men. They draw lots, appoint the executioners, 10 men who kill everyone. Then they appoint one of them to kill the other 9, and then he kills himself. So Masada is a tomb. This is like where the last of the soldiers, the last of the holdouts against Rome died and are buried. And from the destruction of Jerusalem to this last event here at Masada is 1,333 days. That number will come up later. So the Jewish people lose their homeland, lose their city here in this first century. The Romans tried to erase the connection between the people and the land. Again, people and the land is key to all of this. So they remake Jerusalem into a pagan city. They call it the Aelia Capitolina. And to further erase the connection of the Jews to the land, they renamed the land of Israel Palestina for the Philistines. So that's where we get Palestine. It was invented by the Romans to name this place, but it was the Jewish land for thousands of years before that. So after this, John the Apostle writes his books around the 90s or so, and he dies, and that ends the era of the scriptures. The Old and New Testament are complete, the Bible is complete, and moving on from here will be everything that happens after the days of the Bible. So fast forwarding through hundreds of years, the Roman Empire divides in two. Byzantines are the ones who now occupy this land. Then in the 7th century, the 600s, when the religion of Islam is invented by Muhammad, his followers, the Muslim Caliph Umar, they occupy the land. And from then on, it's pretty much under Muslim control, except for the Crusades, when there's some back and forth with those folks. But pretty much the Muslims are the ones who have the land. Now, all of this brings us fast forwarding to the year 1517. Notice that ends in 17. We're watching years that end in 67 and 17. So what happens here is we have a guy named Selim I. He's also known as Selim the Grim. So here he is here. No, we're not going to give you money. Nope, nope, nope. Close. And go back to you. So Selim the Grim, here he is. Now this guy, he's an Ottoman prince. He defeats his father and his brothers and comes to the throne. He challenges the Persian Shah in battle, defeats him. He turns his armies against these folks called the Mamluk Sultanate, another Islamic empire there in Cairo. He defeats them at the Battle of Raydaniyah. This is on Monday, January 22nd of 1517 BC. Why does this matter? Because when he conquered them, he gained their land, which included the Promised Land. So now the Ottomans have the Promised Land from 1517 forward. They're going to have it for the next 400 years. So the Ottomans now have control of the Promised Land, and they will for quite some time. And as Brother Butler says, largest world empire here. So yeah, it's a pretty big deal. Absolutely. China to Spain. So yeah, it's big stuff here. So now this takes us to a land that's a little closer to home, or we like to call it United States of America. So let me grab a quick reference here. In Jonathan Cahn's book, The Mystery of the Shemitah, dealing with the Sabbath years. Let's see, you want to be, yeah, right there. So how does America tie into this? And where is America in their relation to God and their connection to Israel? Well, when America was founded and settled, it was very much with the intention of being the new Israel. It's very much with that idea that we wanted to be a land dedicated to God, just as Israel was dedicated to God. Not a theocracy, there'd still be free will and freedom of religion, but the laws were going to be in keeping with Judeo-Christian values and principles. They were not adopting the law of Moses. No one is under that, but they're making these vows and promises that these are how we want to live. So even in our early days, this was the thought process. We are looking at a picture of Yale University, which was founded in 1701. So what we have right here is the seal of Yale University, which has right there on the seal of Yale University, those are the Hebrew words from the breastplate of the high priest. How many Yale students today would pass a test knowing that's what's on their seal? Probably not many. So let's check out another one. Here is Columbia University, King's College, founded in 1754. Let's take a look at their seal. The official seal for Columbia University has the ancient Hebrew name for God. And notice it's not just a New Testament connection, it's a recognition of the Old Testament Hebrew connection as well that they're seeing here. So you go on from here to Dartmouth College, founded in 1769. Let that load up here. That one takes a little second. On the seal of Dartmouth College, here we are. Dartmouth College, we have the Hebrew words that translate Almighty God. So all of these universities, with that Christian understanding of this is where we are basing ourselves and dedicating ourselves on. So that brings us now to a place known as Federal Hall in New York. And we're going to take a look at Jonathan Cahn's book, The Harbinger, which talks about the event that happened here. This is Thursday, April 30th of 1789. So what happened there? Page 199. Share a little bit here. What happened here is America, as we know it, with a president, a Senate, and a House of Representatives, came into existence. April 30th, 1789 was our first day as a fully constituted nation. It's the day America's first president was inaugurated, and that's where it happened. Let's take a look at these pictures here. So there's a statue of George Washington on the steps where he took his oath as president, and our nation was settled in. Listen to what he said in his inaugural address. No people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand which conducts the affairs of men more than those of the United States. Every step by which they've advanced to the character of an independent nation seems to have been distinguished by some token of providential agency. He also says, it would be peculiarly improper to omit in this first official act my fervent supplications to that Almighty Being who rules over the universe, who presides in the councils of nations, and whose providential aids can supply every human defect, that his benediction may consecrate to the liberties and happiness of the people of the United States a government instituted by themselves for these essential purposes. So thank you, President Washington. And here's inside Federal Hall. And there's the statue. There's what it looked like at the time. And I kick myself because I've been to New York twice and I have not made it here yet.
When people talk about our nation not being founded on these values, that's just not accurate.
So Sister Ashley asks, so our nation, when people say our nation's not founded on these values, they are inaccurate? Yes, they are. Absolutely. And we're going to see even more example of that.
There was no organized method with which founding fathers create a theocratic type nation. That's what they all came from. But they were relying on the fact that the citizenry
Pass that back to him.
was largely a Christian founded society, and that's the foundation of which the laws were based on. For the society that existed at the time, which was largely an American Christian Judean foundation. But there's no deliberate, forceful intent to set up a theocratic nation.
Exactly. So as we're saying, it's not a theocracy, but the laws are in keeping with Judeo-Christian biblical principles. Absolutely. Bethany.
I was just going to say, I recently found a verse in the Bible where it listed, it's the judicial, the legislative, and the executive.
Mhm.
Were you going? Were you
No, you're great. Go ahead.
There is a verse in the Bible. I wish I knew where it was. I have my phone to be able to tell you where it was, but it talks about God as he's the leader, the end all, the executive part.
Yep.
He's the judge, because we're not to judge, and
Right.
then he's the and then he's the legislator. You know what I mean? I wish I could find it. I wish I could remember what it was. But there is a verse in the Bible where it sets up our whole system of the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch, because God does those things. It lists that God is the creator of all those, that like he's the judge, so the judicial branch, he's the, I'm just repeating myself.
No,
but
absolutely.
I'll find it.
No worries.
But it came up and I'm like, oh my goodness, I mean, each branch of our government is based on this verse in the Bible where it talks of God as our judge, our leader, and I can't explain it.
It's in actually that's in the law of Moses where that's referenced, and we got our ideas from a guy named Montesquieu who got his ideas from that exactly, those scriptural examples where all that is set up for the people to enter the land, how the judges work, how God is the lawgiver, and how all of that plays out exactly, and how the people are to be faithfully executing the laws given to them, and have right men in judgment positions and all that stuff. So yeah, very scriptural basis for all of that. This is the Bible that George Washington made his inaugurational oath on. Yeah, right there, it's on display there. So not only did Washington say those things in his inaugural address, but here's what Congress did 1 week before, April 23rd, 1789, at the Constitutional Convention. Here's the quote. On the morning of the day which our illustrious president will be invested with his office, the bells will ring at 9 o'clock when the people may go up to the house of God and in a solemn manner commit the new government with its important train of consequences to the holy protection and blessing of the Most High. An early hour is prudently fixed for this peculiar act of devotion and is designed wholly for prayer. That's our Congress that said that. So morning of April 30th, 1789, sounds of bells filled the nation's capital for 30 minutes, calling the people to go up to the house of God, commit the new government to the holy protection and blessing of the Most High. That really happened. Other stuff there at Federal Hall. And yes, for those who did not know, New York was our first capital before. Let's see. So that same day, it gets even better. The same day, the first president government, they would gather for prayer to commit the future into God's hands at a place that was specially chosen for this purpose. So after they finished delivering the presidential address, he leads the Senate and the House of Representatives on foot in a procession through the streets of the Capitol from Federal Hall to right here. St. Paul's Chapel, which is part of Trinity Church. So this little stone church. So the president and Congress, after the inauguration, gather in here to pray and dedicate the nation to God on April 30th of 1789. So basically, and I want to emphasize this point, even though America was never bound by the law of Moses, which Jesus Christ satisfied completely, so no need for that, we made a vow to God that we were going to honor and live by these Judeo-Christian principles, and that we were going to seek his guidance and his protection. This is the founding and establishment of our nation. That's the tomb of Alexander Hamilton right there at this place. So there that is. The gathering is recorded in the Annals of Congress as part of the first ever joint session of Congress with an acting president. So this began with the sacred gathering before God. Again, the key is seeking protection and blessing. So under that statue of George Washington, it's written, on this site in Federal Hall, April 30th, 1789, George Washington took the oath as the first president of the United States of America. One other thing that George Washington said in his inaugural address: the propitious smiles of heaven can never be expected on a nation that disregards the eternal rules of order and right, which heaven itself has ordained. Basically, he gave a warning at the same time. The day America turns away from God will the day we start losing those blessings. So that's the founding of America that you're not often going to get told in public school. So any thoughts, comments, questions on that? This is in New York, St. Paul's Chapel. Ah, you were. How cool. If you know how that connects to anything in modern events, shh. We'll keep that all going for everyone. Yeah, neat little place. And there it is in the midst of all those skyscrapers, and skyscrapers are another story we'll get to as well. So Israel's been off the land this whole time. So now we're going to start, I'll tease this and we'll pick this up next time. We're going to now go back to Bethlehem, to the Church of the Nativity. And while we're getting there, so after the inauguration, after this is set up, 28 years later, a gentleman is born by the name of Karl August Ferdinand Schwartz. He's born in 1817. So we got a 17 here. So I figured out this is 300 years after Selim the Grim. So this guy, he's born in Prussia, which is now Poland. He's an Ashkenazi Jew, converts to Christianity at the University of Prussia. He's baptized in Berlin in 1837, 20 years old. In 1858, Samuel Abraham Hirsch attempts to assassinate him, stabs him while he's on his way to the pulpit, but he survives. So this guy is going to do something very significant here shortly, but we'll go back to Karl Schwartz in a minute. So that's the timing of his birth with all this. Now remember, Israel has been taken over. This is the area of Bethlehem we're looking at here. Right there's the Church of the Nativity. Israel's been taken over by all these different folks. Right now it's the Muslims, the Ottomans specifically. What happens here at the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, a conflict arises between the Greek Orthodox and the Latin clergies because a metal star of Bethlehem has mysteriously disappeared. And they're fighting over what happened. The Russian government sides with the Orthodox clergy. The Ottoman Empire, along with France, Britain, and Sardinia, side with the Latin clergy. This conflict starts the Crimean War. A war is launched over this tin star that went missing. The Crimean War was from October of 1853 to February of 1856. Now, from 1853, start noticing 7-year intervals. This is prep and setup. This war changed everything for the Ottoman Empire. So here's this church right here, where all this, the key to all of this. So we're 1853 is when the war starts. Over the star going missing from this church. Maybe that's it right there. I don't know. That picture was just uploaded last month. I really find the Eastern Bloc countries, I know this is Bethlehem, but this reminds me a lot of some of the Eastern Bloc stuff and their influence. Kind of has a unique look to it. Church of the Nativity is where they believe Jesus Christ was born. And this is supposed to be the cave and all that. So that's that Church of the Nativity. So the Ottoman Empire enters into massive loans to fight and finance this war. And they find themselves in huge debt and on the verge of bankruptcy. So what do? 2 years after the war, they enact the Ottoman Land Code. All the land now has to be registered so it can be taxed, so they can raise money. This opens the door for the large scale buying and selling of Ottoman land, including the Holy Land. But according to Ottoman law, no land can be sold to foreigners, those outside the empire, and they're certainly not thinking of any jubilees, or they don't want the Jews, all that stuff. So that takes place 2 years after the war's end, 1858. What happens in 1860, 7 years after the war starts, over there, we have the start of our own war here. 1860 is the election of President Lincoln, which is the catalyst for our Civil War, the Secession, and then the war that followed that, 7 years after that. 7 years after the start of the Civil War, 1867 will be a year that launches everything for the return of the Jews. And again, this is setting the stage for the end times and things that are going to happen there. So I'm going to stop there with Karl Schwartz in 1867 and what he does as a Messianic Jew and getting things ready for the return of the people here. So with that, setting the stage again, lots of information, nothing you have to remember. This is just kind of being planted in the background as we see things are going to be coming back. Again, just the way the people left is going to be very similar to the way people returned. And God's eyes are still on Israel today. I think it's so true when I hear folks who study the end times and look at things, they pretty much say Israel is God's clock. Watch Israel, you'll see things. Jesus said, you're not going to know the day or the hour that Jesus returns, but he says you'll know the spiritual signs. And a lot's going to happen before Jesus returns, but these are things to be watching for, and we'll see all that. So leaving things there for now, any questions, any thoughts or comments from anyone on all this setup for where things are going from here? If not, we'll go and call that a wrap and stand and get ready to be dismissed. And next time we'll actually pull up some of the verses that are being fulfilled as all this is happening. So we'll stop the share here, stop the recording.